So good afternoon, everybody. Magandang hapon, maayong hapon, salamat siang. Thank you to the community working group and also to Ben and Jika for supporting the call today. My name is Celina Agaton, and I am Filipino Canadian. I did actually study equity studies in university, which includes colonialism, gender, race, class, and culture. And I also grew up in Indonesia, in the Philippines, and in Canada. So that really began my journey and helped inform my mapping practice every day. So this is a really timely discussion because in a few days, we'll actually be marking the 500th anniversary of the arrival of Ferdinand Magellan into the Philippines. And this journey, among others during this time, really led to the global scaling of the slave trade and the exploitation of the wealth in non-white countries. Even the roots of Western science and medicine are intertwined with the history of the slave trade. And if we look at the maps, the patterns 500 years later, the trade routes, the migration routes, the history of violence are the same patterns today. So if you think about everything that you consume in a day, the coffee, the tea, the sugar, the shampoo, the soap, the gold, and all our electronics, these all came from colonized countries. And in the way this can feel invisible, this is partly why it's important that we have this discussion today. So there are a lot of Western opinions in the humanitarian and OpenStreetMap community that colonialism was in the past, that we should just get over it, and that non-white communities lack the capacity to map or let alone manage their infrastructure. So when we have humanitarian OpenStreetMap embarking on a mandate to map 1 billion people in 94 non-white countries, do we know if we have the right to map? Do we have the consent of these communities? And are we aware of the consequences and unintended consequences of mapping? With COVID-19, we have seen that non-white communities and women have felt the most impacts from the pandemic. And with entire economies destroyed, multinational organizations will be the few left remaining standing. And what does their leadership look like? What does that mean for our most vulnerable communities? While open data and mapping have so much potential, a lot of the language we're using today feels like a decade ago when you're talking about the enormous potential of the internet and social media. So today, you'll hear from the lived experiences of wonderful community leaders in the space. We'll have an hour-long discussion, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to join breakout rooms with each speaker for 30 minutes toward the end. So right now, I'd love to introduce our amazing panel today. So please introduce yourself and describe your heritage, your personal and professional background, and what led you to mapping and what you enjoy about it. So you have 5 minutes each to discuss this. And Ima, let's start with you.
Thank you very much, Celina. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. My name is Immaculata Mwanja, but everyone calls me Ima. I am based in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And my heritage is I come from Mbeya, which is a region in Tanzania, and I am a Nyakyusan by tribe. Our country, for those who don't know, has more than 120 tribes. And yeah, I am a Nyakyusan. For my personal, let's say, educational background, I have always wanted to be an urban planner ever since I was growing up. I was looking up to my aunt, and this is what I studied in university. But then when I was in the university, a lot of software, for example, that we were using were proprietary. And yeah, we can talk about this a lot later. And so it was really, really difficult for the students, i.e. me and my colleagues, to use this software unless we have, for example, a cracked version. But then I joined the open data mapping in 2015 when I was in my first year of university, where I was introduced to QGIS and other open software. And I saw how they were very helpful to me. And since then, I just wanted to get involved with open data and open mapping and advocate for other people to be using this data, because I saw how it kind of impacted my educational life or background, not being able to access different information because they're like too expensive. And so from there until I finished my university studies, I just have been an advocate for open data and open mapping. And so I am really, really excited to be in this panel and to share my views and to hear all of your views. So yeah, I hope we have a nice session. Thank you, Celina.
Great. Next, we have Ribbon.
Hello, everyone. Hello, I'm Tasauf, also known as Ribbon. Actually, I'm from Bangladesh, a very small country in Asia. And I'm right now working with iMMAP over here, doing some as senior analyst out here in Mwanja response. And also, I've been very much involved with OpenStreetMap Bangladesh community over here. I have been running a social enterprise over here based on open data and open mapping, along with the community members out here, trying to sort of creating and empowering the community towards greater, I would say, social enterprise experience with open, how we can contribute and at the same time take something out of open data ecosystem itself and the advantages and things like that. I'm actually from computer science background initially, but later on I have been just hopping around in different, I would say, platforms and with different subject lines. Right now also I'm involved in another study, socioeconomic study over here about the COVID impact in the socioeconomic sector in Bangladesh itself. And in terms of my experience with OpenStreetMap and Hot Community, I have been involved with Hot Community for last since 2015 or so. I have been nurturing the community, local community over here. The main thing that drive me to get engaged with the open data and open mapping ecosystem and community-centric, I would say, campaigns and involvements is more like try to make sure our limitations of the local population, local student bases, and local entrepreneurs also with lack of data, also to the researchers itself, because we have found it is very much hard to get data for free, I would say, for the researchers, for studies and other things to go with something. That's the thing. Thank you.
And last, we have David.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm from an island called Luzon in the Philippines, and our house is close to a river called Pasig Potrero. Luzon is one of the largest islands in the world, and it's part of the 7,641 islands of the Philippines. Uh, and we have 180 languages, of which I can speak two, Tagalog and Kapampangan. And broadly, our peoples are part of what you call the Austronesian family, which stretches from Taiwan to Philippines, Indonesia, as far away as Madagascar, and here in Aotearoa in New Zealand, where I'm at the moment doing a PhD in GIS. In the Philippines, my profession is map maker, cartographer, urban planner, environmental planner, humanitarian, beauty pageant host sometimes when you have to do it in the village. Many things. As my colleagues know, being a map maker and OSM mapper in our places involves many kinds of labor, and that's what I'm interested in. The labor, the stories, the sovereignty, the discourse. I both practice and analyze and critique it, and I'm trying to write a PhD about it, about OpenStreetMap from a personal autoethnographic experience. Uh, my interest recently is about anti-colonialism and also non-binary philosophies of the Pacific, because I think that since our ancestors are wayfinders of these great oceans, so before Magellan even came, our ancestors have been going around for thousands of years. So we regard the ocean as a network. That's our understanding of space. And from where I come from, we come from a very cyclical point of view of space-time. So for you to know where you're going, you need to know where you come from. And that's how we so-called move forward. We really want to learn from the past. That means that our ancestors were scientists in themselves. And that's how they came to New Zealand, which is, I was surprised. I came here, they speak the same words in our town, like 8,000 kilometers away. How did that happen? So I'm in that journey too. I'm also trying to learn how to become a waka crew. I was cleaning the deck of the waka the other day in Auckland. So that's also my interest. And also, lastly, I'm in OpenStreetMap and HUT. I want to encourage everyone to be more critical of our philosophy and virtues and the power that we're trying to build here, because mapping is a powerful tool. So as people here know, I am a very political map maker. I'm very honest about it. My goal in OpenStreetMap is to help in the sovereignty and independence of the peoples of the Pacific, because in 2021, you still have American, British, French colonies here. And I think mapping has a role in that, whether in reproducing that or countering that. And I'm very happy to be with you in this space. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to our speakers for the introduction. Now we're going to spend another 5 minutes to go over the legacy of colonialism. So please briefly share the colonial experience in your country, and then how this legacy has affected the culture and your personal and work experiences. Please share the impacts of colonialism in open data and mapping, and how Western mapping techniques may have ignored or erased local cultural practices. Since colonialism itself is a patriarchal construct, I'd love for David to include a discussion, because in the Philippines, just like in other pre-colonial countries, it was actually a matriarchal society before colonization. Go ahead, David.
Thank you. I'll take off from that intersection between land, gender, and power. I totally agree that Western project systems have been disrupting how our peoples have lived for a very long time. My example is my mom. My father is a senior pastor, but it's actually my mother who runs the show, and she actually holds the properties, and she has what we call the mana, the power. And for the past 500 years, different empires have come and gone, because actually I come from a Pacific perspective, an Asia Pacific perspective. Magellan came to the Philippines in search of trade routes. So for the past 500 years, Western and even Eastern empires like China and Japan have been interested in securing that trade route, let's say, between Manila and Acapulco and Mexico for hundreds of years. And that's why you have, let's say, remaining colonial projects in the Pacific whether, let's say, in the US invasion of Vietnam decades ago, that was an imperial invasion, or actual military bases, let's say in the Philippines, in Guam, in Hawaii, which is a settler colonial space by the US Empire, or the French in Tahiti. And the colonials are there not because they just want to have a vacation in the islands. They're there for power to secure trade routes. And this has been doing negative effects on our peoples, let's say in sovereignty, in matters of our own governance, let's say in the environment, the military tests, the actual military tests. Actually, the Pacific was a major nuclear testing site, and that was kind of hidden from the world for a very long time. And the people are still dealing with the cancer and the pollution. Or for example, in my town, which is Pampanga, the province, we had one of the largest military bases of the US for a very long time. And then when the base closed, the toxic pollution is there. So the damage and the trauma and everything associated with it is still there. I rather claim that we do not live in a post-colonial age. We are living in a recolonizing age. So for example, in another form of colonialism, which is Southeast Asian, like Indonesian or Filipino colonialism in Mindanao, you see the same dynamics happening where armies from a Westphalian sovereign state, the Westphalian notion of a sovereign country with hard borders, are trying to impose their will on the many 180 languages and peoples of the Philippines. So that's what I would like to emphasize, that we need to wake up from the illusion that it is over. When the United Nations was formed in 1940s and World War II is over, that doesn't mean that colonialism just, we all woke up and it's all gone. Because imagine it's a 500-year project and 500-year events have a momentum. So it's just how many decades since the war ended. It takes a while for these systems to be undone and for them to collapse and to fall out of use. So that's what I would like to emphasize. And that's why we need to be not just be decolonial, but be anti-colonial. It's very important. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Yes, it took us 500 years to get here. So a Facebook post is not going to solve anything. And we do have to have these difficult and uncomfortable discussions to be able to move anything forward. Now, Ribbon, in Bangladesh, you're one of the highest at risk for disasters, for climate change, and that brings in a whole revolving door of foreign aid workers, of consultants. I remember during Super Typhoon Haiyan, meeting with the UN, in 1 week alone, there were 63 meetings taking place. So how has that affected your work and your personal experience?
Thank you, Celina. Actually, when David has explained a bit about his ancestral and colonialism experience altogether, it was in a way that in Bangladesh, though we are saying that we have been independent only for, I would say, till 1971, but if we think about our style of how we have been impacted with colonialism, it's a mixed experience altogether. I was just wondering in the memory lane, I would rather say, to find out where we started to become colonialized, I would rather say, because it was dated back in when I would say the empires were there, the Muslim empires invaded. Before that, there were different small groups of people coming from actually the Mongols were being in power in our region, and also later on with colonialism, we actually most of the cases I would say we say about the British colonialism that has lasted 200 years or so. But altogether, it has been not a very good experience, I would rather say, but at the same time, it helped us in a way, taking some good from those. Also, we have taken a lot of bad things, I would rather say, given us a lot of cultural, I would say, going back to our ancestral cultures and things, it became hard. That's the thing. But right now, as you were mentioning about the impact of climate change and humanitarian aids and other things that has been prolifically over here, presence in our country. We also need to mention another thing. We are hosting almost one of the biggest refugees population out here in Bangladesh right now. Yesterday, I was having a statistics that it was with only 0.31 percentage of population we have in the global arena. We are hosting 4.7% of the refugee population of this world. So if we go like this point, at this point, you have to say, when we are taking them in and having sort of giving them refuge to our country, it's not always like, I would say, a decision that has been made. Always it is very much willingly, but also there has been some pressure and things are also going on. This is more of a more, I would say, conversation people might not feel comfortable with. When aid agencies are giving something, also they are also trying to push us hard on. So we align with the agendas and the things that has been there. And in terms of open mapping and other things and data sharing and all other things are also coming out. I would say in a positive sense to our national consensus too. But at the same time, sometimes it is also becomes a question of our sovereignty, of our existence itself. And all these things are sometimes it is become more hard to cope up with in all those terms and things like that. But still, we are being trying. We are being trying to cope up with all this internal, external, and I would say pressure points, and trying to balance things so that we can manage, take good from whatever is coming, and filter the bad things. But it's not always easy, I would rather say.
Thanks, Ruben. Rory just posted a link to the chat that there's actually a Google Doc if you wanted to add some thoughts, highlights for the breakouts after the session. So check the chat for that link. And then someone was asking about a hashtag. So I just suggested decolonize because that's been widely used on Twitter, and then hashtag OSM as well. So we're actually just a few minutes ahead of schedule. So I wanted to have a discussion between the panelists actually, and to comment on, especially on the Audacious project and all the challenges that you've mentioned so far. How do you see this audacious goal affecting the billion people with the challenges that you've spoken about today? You can also comment on each other's comments.
I would like to let Ima speak first.
Thank you, David. And yeah, so I hadn't spoken about the colonial legacies in Tanzania, so I'll just speak a little bit on that. So Tanzania has had a history of being, okay, not just colonized, but also slave trade, whereby we say that it was abolished in 1873, but it is believed that it went on after that. And up until 1885, when colonization came to Africa, Tanzania, was colonized by Germany until 1918, in the end of the First World War. But then you would think that, we would be free of that, but we were colonized again by Britain until 1961, where we got our independence. But then I think that this has had a direct impact to, and like I was saying earlier, to our education system, where, for example, right now we're using the UK syllabus, where, like I was saying, in the universities or in schools, we're using proprietary software that is not favorable for the students that are using it in here. So I can say that colonialism has had more negative impact than it has brought positive, because the people right now here do not have the technological ownership that you would want to have. And I'm speaking about the residents in Tanzania, and I think Africa at large when I say that. So I wanted to quote Ivan Gaden, and I saw him in here. Hi, Ivan. He wrote a blog actually about the use of proprietary software in the aid sector perpetuates racial injustice. And there is a point that he mentioned that the proprietary software has been a barrier for African people to participate as equals in humanitarian and development work in their own continent. And I believe this because of like different projects that we have done that, for example, like you find a donor requires or asks you to use proprietary software that, as locals, we cannot afford that. And it's easy for the donors because, they come from the West. It's easy for them to think that the software is easily available to us, but it's really not. And we are advocates of using open software because, one, we know that, it's, let's say, easy to use, but it's also easily accessible to the people that are using it here. And so we've just been trying to advocate for the use of open software, open data. And also another impact that colonialism has brought is to the culture, not just open mapping, not just open data, but to the culture itself. We can see I was talking to my dad and to my grandparents about this, and they have seen the shift that has occurred ever since, the pre-colonial age or era to post-colonial era, and the culture of the people in Tanzania. And I was telling you earlier that we have more than 120 tribes. That is like more than 120 indigenous people here who had their own culture that they were implementing before. But right now we can see that is deteriorating and people are adapting Western culture, and this is, our culture is being forgotten. And for us millennials, we might find it as, it's really good because we're adapting to the environment, we're exposing ourselves. But to our ancestors who had their own culture, like this kind of makes them furious. And even for right now, we're saying that we're in a post-colonialism era. But when I really, really think about it, I don't think that we're post-colonial era. Okay, yes, we are not being colonized, but we're in another era, which is the neo-colonialism era, whereby even when people don't see that they are being colonized, we really are. And I really just want to find a way to make people see that. And I just feel like, using open data and open mapping can be a step towards that. And to come on your point, Celina, about how this audacious vision might have impact to the indigenous people. I mean, I love the idea that, HOT wants to map an area home to 1 billion people. It's really good for people to be on the map, for people to be seen, especially people that are being affected by different disasters, different crises, and need or want first responders to reach to them. And since, for example, the data are not available in proprietary information. So for example, like Google, it usually focuses on just the town areas and not the local people that are being affected by these individuals. So I see as the open data and open mapping being one step towards making these people being seen, receive the help that they need. But also on another side, I think it's their right to decide whether they want to be on the map or not. Because what we're advocating is for people to have a voice. And so if, for example, an indigenous community doesn't want to be on the map, I would suggest or advise to first listen to that community. Why don't they want to be on the map? What has brought that ideology? Maybe they have another history, like a colonial history of that affected them by being on the map, that they don't want it to affect them anymore. And so I think that it's very good to have and important to have 1 billion people or an area home to 1 billion people mapped on the map. But it's also really important to listen to the indigenous people that, let's say, do not want to be on the map. And I don't know, I would say that if they don't, then it's their right to not want to be on the map. And if, for example, we want them to be on the map, and we ask them, or we tell them the importance of them being on the map, and they agree, then yes, we should go ahead and map them and put them on the map. But if they still don't want that to happen in their community, then it is their right to not be on that map. Thank you.
David, did you want to go next?
Can I speak? Thank you. Thank you, Ima. I agree with your points. I think I'm gonna tell you a story. So once upon a time, I had a big debate with a European mapper who said we need to map everything everywhere in the world. We're opening the world, liberating the world, saving the world. I'm not gonna name the mapper. But 500 years ago, when Magellan came to the Philippines, they were under the same story. The Pope gave them the right to the doctrine of discovery. Do it for Jesus. So in their mind, they were the saviors of the world. So let's look at ourselves that way too. We need to be critical of about the stories we tell ourselves. Because even for me as a Filipino, we have 180 languages and many sovereignties. The Westphalian imperial sovereignty that was imposed on us, we did not create that. In fact, before, we were many sovereignties going around the ocean as a network, changing all the time. It's a very fluid kind of power space. And me as a Filipino, I could not claim that everyone in the Philippines wants to be on the map. In fact, I've shared this so many times that even right now, there are many communities who are still being bombed by the government of the Republic of the Philippines, supplied with US weapons. And for me, to force the mapping of everywhere in the Philippines feels like a very moral choice. So I've been thinking about that a lot. That's why I also slowed down on my mapping for a while, because I said, well, the people 500 years ago thought they were saving the world. What if 50 years from now, I'm going to look back on what I did today and then say, oh, I should have been more careful. So I propose the following. Number one, let's reconsider our definitions of openness. What does it mean to be open? Are you open enough to stop mapping if the community says, no, we don't want your map, or maybe later, or we're going to make the map, you don't have to do it for us. Number two, it's about refusal to, about what I said before. And number three, it's about consent. So I hope we can think about that, because I do not have the answer, since I come from that philosophy that there are many kinds of sovereignty, about claims to rights to the land, and rights to exist. And uh, that brings me to my last point. What does it really mean to be a humanitarian mapper today? Who are we really working for, and to whom does the benefits really accrue to? Because for me, I appreciate open mapping. There was a time when the national government, and they're still doing that, are withholding data from people like me as a citizen. So I use OpenStreetMap to exercise our sovereignty too, because the government was not respecting the desire. On the other hand, uh, I also recognize my position as a Tagalog Kapampangan Filipino. We come from the domineering culture that inherited the republic from previous colonial states. So my position there uh, means that I have an interest in opening everyone, because we are at the center of that system. But if you are not at the center of that political system, what does it mean to be mapped? And there were times when people told me to not map, so I stopped, because I thought, well, um, if I don't want to be forced in mapping, I should also not do it to others, like the golden rule. So I hope the whole of HOT and the whole humanitarian mapping industry can reflect on this process, because there's really something. I try to look for patterns in my PhD. 500 years ago, the Europeans wanted to save the world and map the world. And now we are audacious in mapping the world. But did we actually involve that 1 billion the project proposal? So that's a big question. And uh, I would just like us to have that process, so we can try to figure our way around it and have an equitable and just future.
May I just, I'm totally agreeing with David in some specific points too, in a way. Uh, the indigenous people or the local communities, whether they want to be mapped or not, that should be more of a, it should be taken more of as their right-based choice, because they have that right, they have that autonomy, whether to be on map or not. And in those cases, I also agree with one thing David just mentioned, that whoever in the pre-colonialization period, and also the colonialized colonialists are after that, someone told us that they are freeing us with their religions. Someone told us they are freeing us with making us civilized. So those things were there when colonialism was there. If I mention about our part of this world, when I would say, based on religion, we have several religious invaded in our own territory in past over there. Each and every religious based empires were saying that they're freeing us from the religion and taking us closer to God. Later on, when British and others came up, they are still saying they made us civilized. So after that, when the others are saying that, okay, we are giving you technology, we are making you sort of, we are advancing your part of the region. It's always there is something, those confusion and some sort of things that I would say get buried in our mind, that is there something hidden out there. Even with the population right now, if when we are going to the communities for mapping, I would say I can remember one project out there. I was with that was American Red Cross's project. We were trying to find out the building level vulnerabilities of earthquake over here in Dhaka City. And when we're trying to map those things up, we have experience that people were not sure whether they should give us the information, because that also creates some sort of, I would say, problem for them. They are fearing of like having their sort of administratively, they don't want to expose about their wealth and their presence out there. All those things are there. And also, if we are going to map out like Islam, that is an informal location, informal sort of residential area. But those are not, I would say, legal. So if we are putting those on maps, straight away, there might be some consequences coming out later on that people will see that, okay, these are not legal people having their legal right to have their residence out there. But later on, it might be demolished and they will lose their livelihood and shelter out there. So that might also happen. Not in all slums, there has been humanitarian workers or aid agencies are working, or not always there. It is supported out there by the other people, or you can say the wealthy people out there. They might find a way to go and try to fetch those lands and take it for themselves. And in the name of industrialization and at the same time, the advancement of the community and things comes up again in a different manner, I'd rather say. So all these things should be taken under consideration when we're talking about making the map open or making the data available out there. Whether we should, as Ima said, we should first try to find a way out with to know whether why they are not giving their consent on this, but at this I would say their decision or their choice should be the last one that should be prevailed out there when we are saying that we're going to map or not. So with the concern David showed that with the Odysseus project, we're talking about mapping the unmapped zones and population out there. We should think about if we have closely taken these things into considerations also and put it there in our thinkings and also in the project outlines. Thank you.
Can I say one last thing as a follow-up before the breakout and all that? Just very, very quickly. I like overthinking because as a student, because I had the time to overthink. This is a privilege. Before I used to have 3-month contracts and just map all the time. Now I had time to stop. So I stopped for about 3 years, slow down. It really made me think something like, I've been trying to look at crisis maps, global crisis maps, let's say ACAPs. And you see the places in Africa, Latin America, Asia, Oceania, it's all red, all full of risks and very dangerous. But there's still lots of crises in Europe and the US and the settler colonies in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Why is that not mapped? Or at least there's less mapping there. So sometimes I think, before, the medieval cartographers were mapping the monsters. And then in the age of the modern nation state, they mapped the country enemy. And then it became the barbarians too sometimes, according to the cartographer. And now it's the poverty and the risk and the hazard maps. And again, it's places like us. So we had the sea monsters before. Now we had the highest risk and poverty risk. But if you think about it, given and there's so much evidence about this, about the impacts of colonialism, let's say within US, within Canada, within Australia, within Aotearoa, New Zealand, right here in this land where I'm doing this study, it's been a disaster too. Isn't colonialism a disaster also? And we call that epistemic violence, when certain notions of truth are denied because of certain historical patterns of thought. And I would like everyone to think about that. Every time I tweet the ACAP's Twitter account, hey, why are you not mapping the white supremacist uprising in Washington, D.C.? It's not in the crisis map. So who gets to define crisis? And I would like everyone to think about that very critically, because like you, I want to move on. I want to move forward. But who gets to define that? Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Ruben.
Sorry, just another small note on this. There is another question remains when we are having mapping projects out there in local communities and things like that. Not only mapping projects, I would rather say every humanitarian projects out there. There is a question remaining out there, always coming out from the community leaders and people who are surrounded in the area. That do they know actually what is being done out there, or what will be the outcome? Is it clarified properly to the population that what we guys are doing or any humanitarian aid agencies are doing? People know they are helping. People know they are doing something that might help out, but most of the cases, people are not aware of what is being done and what's going to happen. It is more like more or less like sometimes it feels like when we are just willingly saying I agree when we are just not going through the terms of reference, terms of references and privacy policies, notes that are associated with the commercial, all those applications and things out there coming out from the technology companies and tech companies and other application providers. It's more or less like that community are allowing the whole process and operation out there without properly knowing what's happening. So it is another thing that is of concern, that though people are not blocking the works and operations out there, going against those, but at the same time, the question remains, are they aware of what's coming up and what's being done?
Thanks, Ruben. We're going to transition into the last question, but before that, I mean, the pandemic really revealed all the cracks in the system, both for the Western and non-white countries in the world. But that was the same thing that was happening with colonialism, with the increase in disasters, with the increase in climate change. And so there's a shift that needs to take place where there's the humanitarian aspect and then the development aspect. And those two worlds need to communicate and speak to each other. And also this notion of, you know, the exoticization of being a humanitarian aid worker in the field in some tropical destination. I'd love to see a map of, you know, the correlation between beautiful beaches and all the mapping activity that's taking place. I know working in the conflict regions in Mindanao, I would get a lot of requests being very specific to help map a specific beach in the Philippines. And I would invite people, you know, the critical mapping that needs to be done is in Mindanao. Would you like to join us? And then that would be a surefire, easy way to never hear from them again. But this uncertainty that everybody's feeling around the world right now with COVID, and that's what everybody is saying, is that there's so much unknown. There's this feeling of insecurity, of uncertainty, of precarity. This is actually the ongoing lived experience of non-white communities, of colonial communities for the last 500 years. So I think that's the first step, is to actually acknowledge that we have very different experiences, and especially within the humanitarian and the development sector, is looking at the subtle and not so subtle hints when you see who has power in a room, who has the voice, who does the most talking. But to move this forward, I'd love to hear from the speakers again on what concrete examples do you have personally on how you're able to move this forward to address some difficult, discrimination, or some examples of allies that have stepped in to help improve situations in either your mapping work or even in your personal community life. Ruben, did you want to go first?
I rather say from the community perspective, just before going through that, one thing came into my mind. The insecurity you were talking about in our minds. Just an example. Recently, we have our government has introduced a COVID vaccination program out here in Bangladesh. Mass distribution of vaccines out here. But interestingly, that much, I would say, response from the positive response from the general population out here. The reason behind this, when the vaccination is coming out to them, it is coming from outside, and they're not sure what's in it. They're saying it might create more problem. It might be like we are being used as lab rats. Everything is out there. So those insecurities are at the end of the day, they are making themselves sort of exposed to the risks out there. They're taking those decisions not to go for vaccination. So this comes with all these things we have been talking about, impact and effect of colonialization experience going throughout the times out there. And people are less, have less faith even to the, I would say, the humanitarian workers, humanitarian aid caregivers and aid agencies too. But it was not supposed to be what it should be like. People should have been more eagerly supporting the overall system and overall support mechanism itself. So saying this, most of the cases, what happens when I have been in my previous whenever I'm doing mappings and having this sort of things out there, I would say if we can reach out with more local, I would say the human resources out there. We have PTs who are being volunteering as with us, the community, play a big role in sensitization and having people realizing what are the outcomes and how all these projects and I would say the things we are doing, the works can help them out. And this is a two-way process, actually. You have to take something from the community perspectives, what community is thinking, the local population is thinking, and how they want these things to be done. Most of the cases, the helps are coming from inside the community. If community people are getting, in the whole process. Most of the cases, this is the most helpful. The projects and works I have done, even in the voluntary phases too. So
Okay.
I would say engagement of the local population is the key, and awareness. The more people become aware about what you're doing, more transparency in about the works, projects, and outcomes helps us out in a big way.
Thanks, Ruben. Ima.
Thanks, Celina, and thank you, Ruben. And yeah, just to continue from where Ruben left off. Speaking of the pandemic, so Tanzania has been a pretty interesting country in terms of how it has handled its pandemic, whereby, so not its pandemic, but the pandemic, whereby we stopped giving out the case numbers last year in May. And yeah, because it was officially declared that we no longer have COVID. And interestingly, yes, we some cases went down, hospitals were not overwhelmed, but then last year, late last year, December, and this year, there have been cases rising up, although it wasn't still officially declared that there is COVID. So it has been termed as people have pneumonia or difficulty breathing, and that's it. And with the vaccine coming out, obviously for a country that hasn't said that they have COVID, it's not given priority of being given the vaccinations. And the talks, and I'm not justifying that what is being done is right, but when you listen to people's reason, even not just the government, but even residents in Tanzania who are saying that they won't take the vaccine even if it came here, their reasoning actually goes back to the colonial era, whereby they're saying that this is another way that the white man wants to colonize us again. This is another way that the white man wants to be on top of us. And so, yeah, just listening to that reasoning, and again, I'm not justifying that is right or that is correct, but it just makes you think of the impact that colonialism has had on these people until they don't have trust, I can say, even for some things that are important to them. And going back to open data or open mapping, I have seen that. Okay, so I was talking earlier about preserving the culture, preserving people's culture. But one thing that, let's say, positive impact that I can say colonialism has had for some people in our culture is there are some tribes or cultures that still actually have FGM, female genital mutilation, and gender-based violation to women. And they believe in preserving these cultures. And we know that it's wrong. And yeah, these cultures were going on before colonialism, even after colonialism, but during colonialism, the colonialists or the white men told this or explained to the people that this is bad. And yeah, looking at it, it's bad. So that I can say is kind of a positive outcome, whereby I'm also advocating for the gender-based violation, the female genital mutilation to, stop in the country. And so I believe that, and other people cannot or may not see this, but I believe one way of reaching these people that are facing this kind of violence is through open mapping. And I can give a shout out to Crowd2Map and Hope for Girls for being the advocates for this. And so yeah, they're using open data and open mapping to reach the girls that are being affected by FGM, by GBV, and taking them to safe houses the data that they could not access in like proprietary I don't know, software. So for example, like Google. So they're using software like OSM, they're using maps.me to reach these girls. And yeah, other open software. And I can say that it has been really, really helpful right now because I've been listening to different podcasts and interviews that are being done by Robbie, who is also an advocate, and yeah, she survived FGM and GBV, and she has been like trying to educate and help these girls to reach to safe places. And these girls themselves, they have been also advocates for helping other girls. So yeah, on that note, I'd just like to say that open data and open mapping have really, really helped these societies, these communities to overcome the FGM and the GBV, even though they are still going on, even though there are still other people that want to keep the culture going and believe that the white men are the ones that are I'm lacking the English word for this. Uh, but yeah, the white men are advocating for, demolishing our culture. But you look at the culture and it's not, it's not favorable and it's not, good for the women. But on the other hand, I think that there are some cultures that we need to preserve that have been gone for a long time. And maybe open mapping is one way to bring them back. Maybe going back to our ancestors and talking to them is one way to bring back our culture. So yeah, I think this is kind of like an ongoing conversation that I'm not sure how it's going to end, but I think we're the ones that have to be the advocates for, decolonizing the activities or the culture that have been brought to us, and advocating for getting rid of the cultures, like the negative cultures that have been going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Ima. David?
Yeah, I have so many things to say, but so little time. So I'm just gonna very, very briefly. I think of decolonization in a non-metaphorical sense, and I hear my feedback. Anyway, Dr. Eve Tuck of part of the Native Peoples and Peoples of Canada says that decolonization is not a metaphor. And there have been many attempts before to decolonize, but they're not enough. For example, if I rename all the place names a colonized country, but colonists still have the land, is that really decolonized? So that's a question that goes to people who want to be allies. Let's say you are assisting an indigenous group in making their maps, but not active in the solidarity effort to return the land. So ask yourself why you are really doing that. What do you mean by decolonialism? Also, number two, thinking of who to talk, like am I gonna talk to my younger self or another map maker? Oops, there you go. Uh, I want to address, let's say, a younger David, because I'm just trying to reflect too. I've been in so many conversations about decall, and sometimes it ends up me having to make the other person feel better. And now what I just do is when someone is feels so guilty about what their ancestors did to mine, I just say, get a therapist. It's not my job to please you, to find ways to feel you better. I think it's very important for people who want to be allies to undergo their own healing process. Try to know where you come from, try to know your family history, and get a therapist. It's not me. And okay, that's part of the step to change, but that's the labor of that healing on people like me. And Lastly, it's again about addressing that younger map maker. It's to be strong, to stand on your truth, even as you try to correct the mistakes of the past and look for facts and analyze narratives. Stand your, hold your space. Because there was a time when I wanted to quit making. I didn't want to make maps anymore. But then I thought my ancestors are makers. They mapped the ocean. And I think I need to hold this space for the people who are yet to come. I do not have all the answers, but I think by holding this space and opening these discussions and criticizing what needs to be criticized, continuing what needs to be continued, and abolishing things that need to be abolished, hopefully the people after me can have a better time. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm not sure if the speakers saw, but we actually put a vote out, and we're going to continue in this group setting rather than going into the breakout rooms. So we're still in this big group hug together. And I've asked people to post questions on the chat that they'd like answered. A couple of things that I wanted to acknowledge before we start answering questions is that, for one, it's this terminology of beneficiaries versus, as I prefer to call it, the communities we serve. So as Humanitarian OpenStreetMap moves forward with a mandate to map 1 billion people, we do need to make sure that we are serving those communities and that they are part of this discussion. And that includes making sure that these conversations, just like this one, are accessible to them. Knowing that in COVID, everybody is online, and many of our non-white colleagues and family do not have the luxury of being at home with internet all the time. And so being able to give advance notice so that we have greater participation in these discussions from the group we serve would be great. Also acknowledging that many of the people we serve do not have the bandwidth to download Zoom on their devices. And so for better or for worse, Facebook continues to be an engaging community platform. And thanks to the algorithm, we have very good engagement rates in getting participation from the groups we serve through that medium. And also because they can access it for free for folks that don't know that several countries through Facebook are able to access the internet through Facebook and Facebook apps. So I wanted to make sure that we included that in the next discussion. And also because, especially now, we've seen so many communities being persecuted, being arrested, being killed because they are indigenous, because they are rural, because they are farming communities. And so it's really difficult for them to be a part of this conversation publicly. So if we can make a safe space to allow those conversations to happen, then we can ensure that we have their input in mind, and it's not just the technical folks who also happen to be the mappers and also from the colonial countries who largely are the loudest share of voice in our community that continues to grow every day. So those are just a couple of the comments, and we can go off to the questions now. Question from Heather, I saw that how can we be better allies for anti-racist and anti-colonial efforts in humanitarian mapping? So it's a general question for any of the speakers. Want to answer?
I can answer a bit, just an idea I had during walking. I was thinking, I'm thinking structurally, let's say years from now, are we working towards a future where humanitarian or crisis mapping organizations are not tied to London, Geneva, and New York, Washington, D.C. anymore, because power has a geography, and the values flow through these geographical networks. So at the end, let's say of Audacious, will the hub still be dependent on the global Western hubs? That's I've been thinking. I think the people who want to be allies can help there in in that restructuring of mapping organizations in particular, because that's the main outcome of colonialism and imperialism is dependence, whether through destroying or aiding. Empire has two hands. One hand destroys, one hand helps. And I want someday where my colleagues in the Philippines will follow Filipinos more than the donors. I really want that to happen.
I would also agree with David on this. More localization in terms of, I would say, distribution of power to the local population out there. In terms of, it's not only political, it is more of an organizational power distribution. It should be also coming to the local, I would say, local population, and national national staffs should be more empowered to, I would say, engage more in policy making, and also in the overall structure. I would say higher grid structures. It's more like what this is also coming from, I would say, deep-rooted colonialism effect, I would rather say, because wherever colonialism was present out there historically, you'll see people are more used to going with people coming from outside giving the decisions, rather than taking their autonomous decision and speaking loud of their own things. So it also, I have been throughout my career, I've been with, I would say, voluntarily and occasionally, both ways, involved with different organizations out there. And I have seen in organizational culture, it's there. The practice should be more coming out to empower the local people out there who are contributing more, and making the majority, keeping the majority as majority, not majority become minority out there. Because most of the cases, what happens when decisions are coming from the people coming from outside, expats and other people out there, most of the cases, national and local staffs has a tendency to follow more rather than following local leadership itself. It is deep rooted inside. I would say it's an impact of colonialization out there. So this is something I know aid agencies and humanitarian agencies are working on that. There are many organizations who are constantly working to improve the culture and power shifting things, power balance out there. But still, it's more. It will be, I would say, a long process. But still, organizations should constantly working on that.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I think, yeah, I do agree with David and Ruben, where I think that it's who are allies for facilitating the change. It's everyone, really. It's the community taking initiative for this change. It's the local communities, I think, rising up and wanting to take ownership of their own data or of what they want to do. So, and I'm sorry that I have been talking about proprietary software a lot, but yeah, so for example, proprietary companies or software have their limit to the accessibility, and even though they have some features that you don't find in open software, but they have also limits on how to access their data, or for example, I was talking about this earlier on, where in order to, let's say, have a complete and full working, let's say, ArcGIS software, you have to pay for it, or have a cracked version, which is what I have been using in the university when I was still in school. But I just wanted to say thanks to this, like thanks to the proprietary software and the proprietary companies, we now have a way to make data available to people, for people to have their own decision, for people to have access to open data, because having the proprietary software and the limited access has, helped build people's minds to, be open to open data, and creating different software that, for lack of a better word, are challenging the proprietary software that are accessible to people, that can give people the ability to manipulate the data on however way they want. So yeah, simply answering that question, I think the allies for this change is everyone in the local communities advocating for the change.
Thanks for actually answering that proprietary software question, because there is a question about that. So you've answered that portion. If David if you could answer that portion as well. If proprietary software becomes a barrier for most community participation, what would be the advice for future advocates of free and open source software and even accessibility?
Sure. I see the benefits of FOSS. That's why I'm still a member of OSM. I'm still a member of OSGeo, especially OSGeo Oceania and Global. I try to hold the space because there are LGUs, municipalities in the Philippines whose budgets should rather be spent elsewhere, like medicines, instead of getting the ESRI license every year. That's a lot of money too. And also, I like the promise of independence, at least the promise, independence of FOSS. It's something that we need to redefine and work on as an international community. I've also been trying to overthink the notion of the local mapper and expert because I used to work, I'm an ex-humanitarian development worker. I've worked with many foreign planners and data scientists, etc. I have a proposition. If we want to decolonize mapping, whatever it means, we need to shift our attention from the maps to the mapping to the map makers. Who is making the maps, and whose values are we trying to prioritize? Because I've been in certain situations where, let's say, I try to complain. I like complaining. Maybe you remember us complaining last year about the video by Amazon and Hot about mapping the Philippines like it's another colonial narrative. Whenever I do that, sometimes in a personal level, I get told by, let's say, a London mapper, be thankful to the missing maps London because they put so much time. I'm like, this is a very colonial habit that we need to remove. Actually, the projects are there because of us. The aid agencies need us more than we need them. We have been map makers all along. So I think we need to change these habits of Western volunteers expecting people like me to be thank you for saving us. So that's the product of thinking beyond maps and mapping to the map makers, because the context matters. And number two, about the notion of the international mapping. If you look at the history of Southeast Asia and the history of my peoples, my ancestors, the Indonesians, even how Filipinos today operate, we are a global people. We are global citizens. We are international citizens. We know how the cosmopolitanism works. You can see that in the actual trade that peoples have been doing for hundreds of years. So I think we also need to, because sometimes I feel when you are called local because you are browner and then the white person's international, kind of racism there too. So again, the Austronesians are able to go to Aotearoa 8,000 kilometers away. That's a very international thing to do before the Europeans came. Or when during 1700s and 1800s, there were many traders who have been going around Southeast Asian kingdoms and states have been networking all along. So I think we need to rethink what does it mean to be an international mapper, because I feel that the discourse is kind of boxing us and pinning us at the local level, where in fact, let's say my peoples, we are very mobile. mobile people, our notion of space-time is very networked. The people who run the ships in the world are Filipinos and nurses in the US. You get what I mean? We need to undo that racialization of labor, because if we're not careful, that might happen in audacious, wherein you have a small group of core data scientists commanding an army of clickers in the global hubs, who have far less payment for their work and far less reward and recognition. So I don't want to repeat that in crisis mapping today. Shift your attention, folks, from the maps to the mapping to the map makers.
Thanks, David. We are actually at time right now. We're a minute over. I still see a few questions. So I had a question to Ben and Jika. If we have like 3 minutes to answer the remaining questions, or?
Yes, we can take time to answer the remaining questions.
Okay, great. So there was a question about a repository. I'm just scrolling down to read it. Is there a repository of examples of OSM maps to support struggle for land reappropriation and repatriation and to stop land dispossession, so decolonization in its very non-metaphorical dimension? It feels like a David question. There is actually an example in Canada of the First Nations, Indigenous people there, and I'm pasting the link here, where they've gone and mapped their own territories as well as their own languages on their own dedicated map. So that's just one of the examples. But speakers, if you have any other examples.
It's not a direct answer, but a trend I've been seeing. It's something like this. My thought is something like this. It is up to the indigenous nation and their sovereign leaders to choose whether it's proprietary or open source. It's up to them. And there are people I've seen, let's say in Australia, who come from settler colonial backgrounds. They work for indigenous mapping groups. They work for them. It's the indigenous mapping groups telling them what to do. And for me, I really appreciate that trend, wherein there's an organization who's part of a sovereign groups, and then they tell what the settler colonial mapmakers what to do in that march toward the abolition of colonialism. I'm not very educated about what's happening in Turtle Island in Canada and the US, but that's what I see right now. It's a very tricky thing about sovereignty, because I'm sure we need to all share data for common understanding, but also there are times when certain sacred knowledge needs to be kept within the group. And I also want to say that, and we can help encourage that practice of not oversharing very critical information of a sovereign nation when the organization is the indigenous organization is the one telling the map makers what to do. I think that's a very important thing. I've also seen projects, let's say in South America. I've been following them by DigiDem, which is interesting, where they made like an offline OSM, where the community use it there, but it's not necessarily shared for everyone. At the end of the day, sovereignty is also about stories and knowledge. People have knowledge sovereignty, have labor sovereignty, have story sovereignty. And I think that's a key factor for us to not reproduce colonial patterns.
Ruben, did you have anything to add?
Just adding to, as David was saying, I think it's more like giving the ownership or proprietorship to the local community itself. Because who will be the owner of the map itself? This is a question that comes up whenever we are trying to sort of disseminate OSM itself to a broader population out there, broader community out there. All the time we have experiences this question coming up: who is the owner? Who remains the owner? Even it is coming from the government side too. Whenever we're trying to sort of advocate OSM itself to the government infrastructures. this is one of the things we have to make sure that the ownership, as David was saying, that the example he was giving, that they have a local OSM repository that is kept with them, and they decide what should be open and what should be not. So openness should have some sort of line, I would say a thin line might be, but there should be a line of openness. What should be open, what should be not. It has to be clarified, it has to be transparent out there.
Did you want to add anything, Ima?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have concrete examples on that, but I think I do agree with David and Ruben, and that is what I was saying earlier. Yes, we want everyone to be on the map, but it's up to them to decide to the extent on which the people should be on the map, on an open map. And yeah, on the on the question when you ask, I mean, it's asking about the repository for OSM examples and support struggle for land and reappropriation and repatriation. Yeah, I don't have a concrete example on that, but if I were to speak on the land situation, for example, in Tanzania, our culture has been, ownership of the land is usually inherited from generation to generation. And this has changed, and it has changed ever since the colonial era, where people were, the land that was owned by our ancestors, by the communities itself, it was being divided and given to, like chiefs that were given power by the colonialists themselves. And this has kind of gone down to right now where, we say that the land is owned by the people, but it's really not owned by the people, but it's owned by the government. And at the end of the day, you come and see that a lot of areas are, are informally developed because people do not have rights to their land, because their ancestral right to own land was, I can say, taken away from them, and it's very expensive to own a title to your land. And so for right now, our organization, OMDTZ, we have been advocating for the use of open software to provide land rights to people. And in a much simpler and cheaper way. And this has come with, there has been some challenges to doing this, because the government itself is an advocate for using expensive equipment to survey lands. And so it's a really, like we were saying before, it's a really long step to take, or we have to take a lot of steps in order to have or make people believe that the data, they are the owners of the data. They can access data in a much cheaper way. And so, yeah, I just want to conclude by saying that, or conclude from my end, that I believe that open data and open mapping is an answer to, okay, it's not the answer to decolonization, but it's a step towards having an answer to decolonization and giving people the voice to speak up to, if they want to be on the map or to not be on the map is also another step towards that. And I wanted to quote a part on the blog, on Ivan's blog that we had co-written with him. And there is a part at the end where it says, much more work and fundamental change are necessary to remove the barriers to the meaningful inclusion of people of color and break the monopoly of white Western people in the aid sector. Lowering the barrier to technical work by using free and open source software tools is a positive step that is well within our ability to implement now. And so I agree with this, I agree with this phrase whereby, and like I was saying earlier, I believe that free and open source software is one way to help decolonize data and map making, and yeah, to free open mapping. Thank you.
Thanks, Ima. So I think we'll wrap up from there, but I still see some amazing comments, and thanks, Lily, for sharing that link. The reason I did also post the link to Native Land is that because of the persecution and threats being faced by so many vulnerable communities right now in Canada, we still are safe for the most part to be very critical and speak openly and publicly about what needs to happen. And so in some ways, we're using that as a vehicle to say what other people can't say because of fear of security and safety. So we're hoping to open up more of that conversation as conversations around colonialism, about reparations, what needs to be done to facilitate real change have been ongoing in Canada. And it's not perfect, but we're having the difficult discussions that need to take place for any kind of change to happen. So I think what we've seen is we could go through a million other conversations just based from this one. And so we hope there are more events like these, and we hope we can welcome more of our communities, the communities we serve, into this conversation. And for folks that are kind of navigating the space and looking to learn more, there is actually, and it's also very millennial friendly, there is someone from the US that creates lighter content that deals with these very, very serious topics on colonialism, race, class, and gender. And I'm sharing her name, Blair Imani, so you can have a look there. And she also offers guides on how to kind of communicate and also put into words what many people feel but don't know necessarily how to deal with colleagues or to process things themselves with everything that's going on right now. So that's a little bit lighter than the very heavy topics that we dealt with today. But I wanted to thank our speakers and all the good work that they do for their community. Thank you so much, Ribbon, Emma, and David. And we hope we at some point are able to see you soon. David, did you have something to add?
Yeah, last one. It's from the other. I hear myself again. Anyway, Jesus. Anyway, okay. Virtue,
We can't hear you, so it's okay.
about virtue. One last thing. Hear myself. I thought maybe let's be more critical about honest about that. I think that's about virtue. Our virtues totally neutral, that humanitarian, we are totally neutral, which is useful too. But I think just more political one. And this is what I tell my colleagues. I'm holding this space as a map because I have an agenda. And the agenda is the prosperity of the peoples we care for. And for me, I put that out so I don't try to pretend this is for the good of humanity or whatever the usual stories. I have a specific purpose, and with that purpose, I negotiate my way through this space because I've been, let's say, as a Filipino, we've been through so many things that where people tell us we are going to save you, we're doing this for your good, but they're not being very honest. I would encourage everyone to be very honest about your agenda and share it with everyone, and let's discuss that somewhere because I think that's a big way to move forward. We are mapping with the purpose, and we need to do that critically so we can address the inequalities.
Thanks, David. So we wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. You have all the Twitter handles for everybody in the talk today, and hope you can include more questions and include them perhaps in Heather's session as well. Thank you, Heather. We're excited to pass it over to your side of the world and get more input from the community there. Okay. Thanks, you. Everyone. Enjoy your day. Enjoy your evening.
Maybe turn your camera on, wave. Be nice to see everybody. Bye, everyone.
Everyone, take care. See you after the pandemic.
Ciao. Yeah, no, always online, my friend. See you at State of the Map. Ciao.
See you. Thank you. Bye.